Buonasera a tutti. Come vi è stato già anticipato, ho rimesso il mandato che mi era stato conferito dal Presidente della Repubblica Mattarella di formare il governo del cambiamento.
Good evening and welcome to the world today. There have been dramatic developments in Italy where a huge electoral revolt against the Italian extreme center, that is the center-left and so-called center-right parties, who have run the country for a long, long time, were defeated, and were defeated by one party, the Five Stars, which had the largest vote, the largest single party in Italy today, which claims to be non-ideological, which claims it is neither left nor right, and is a mixture of the two in reality, because lots of people who couldn't bring themselves to vote for the center again on the left tended to vote for the Five Stars. On the other side, we have the Lega Nord, which used to be a party based largely in the Italian north, changing its identity before this election, winning votes, 9% in Sicily, and becoming a national force and putting forward arguments in terms of the economy, like the Five Stars, which are effectively left Keynesianism. I mean, that is the reality. Of course, there are huge problems that remain: the attitude to immigration, the threat to start deporting hundreds of thousands of migrants who have settled in Italy over the years. So nothing is solved, but something has changed. With me tonight is Paolo Gerbaudo, who teaches at King's College London, sociology and culture, has been connected with the Italian activists for a long time and writes as a journalist in Il Fatto di Quotidiano, one of the few, if not the only, papers that supported the Five Star movement in Italy. Paolo, welcome.
Thanks very much.
What is your impression of what has taken place? First, tell me something. As we speak, the president is trying to, let's say, slightly sabotage the formation of a government. Why is he doing this, and how does he have the powers to do this?
Yes, as you were saying, the President of the Republic is a sort of almost honorary post, but in fact, it has some power. It has the power to designate the Prime Minister as well as the ministers. I mean, in most cases, it's simply basically confirming choices made by the parties who have the majority in Parliament, but in theory, he has quite some room for maneuver there. And in this case, it looks like he's trying to use that. And he's using that for the wrong purposes, in a sense that is not to stop the sort of most pernicious right-wing agenda of Lega Nord in particular, but rather to stop figures that he sees as anti-EU. He has this rhetoric against sovereigntism, this term that has become quite prominent in liberal debates around Europe. And basically what he wants to do, he wants to stop the government from taking any measure against the EU and the European Central Bank.
These parties, they don't want to withdraw Italy from the EU. They have been wanting to get rid of the euro, which has been a total disaster for Italy, as it has for Greece, as it has for some other countries. And the Italians have suffered. You know, ordinary Italians have suffered economically because of what the euro has done since it was introduced in Italy.
It has destroyed Italian manufacturing. I mean, since the introduction of the euro, the Italian manufacturing base has decreased by over 1/4. And much of it because basically Germany has taken advantage of that and it has destroyed the Italian industry. I mean, was quite interesting. I was looking recently at the list of Italian companies that have been sold to foreign companies in the last 5 years. And there you see there are some jewels of the Italian industry. There is Pirelli, there is Italcementi, there is Telecom Italia. Many of them were state-owned or partly state-owned company that because of this collapse of Italian industry and of Italian capitalism, largely due to the euro, are basically now being sold to foreign companies. So it is understandable that the population is starting to worry a lot about the euro and wanting to have a change in that because it is not working for Italy. It was working for rich people, but it is not working for ordinary Italians.
But Paolo, what is your estimate? Give me your estimate on both these parties and how they have developed. Let's start with the largest party in Italy today, the Five Stars, which many currents to the left of the extreme center were ignoring, saying it would never win support, it was this, it was that. How do you analyze this party?
Yeah, it's been quite a phenomenal trajectory. The party was founded officially in 2009, right? So it didn't even complete the first 10 years of that, and it is already the first party in Italy. As many people will know, it was founded by this comedian, satirical comedian, Beppe Grillo, who became famous because of his attacks against the political elite, the establishment, the business elite. I mean, initially, it looked very much like a new left party, like a green party. So it had ecology at its center, renewable energy, recycling, electric cars, and some kind of techno-utopia on the internet and so on and so forth. But then progressively, it started encroaching on the right policy platform, namely anti-migration, security, and so on and so forth. So now is a party that is very difficult to kind of position on the political spectrum, on the left-right political spectrum, because it embraces both left and right. So it has activists both coming from the extreme left and the extreme right. It is a sort of union of the opposite in some respects. In other respects, it is in fact quite a traditional centrist party. They wanted to join the Liberal Democrats group in the European Parliament. Eventually, they couldn't do it because the Liberal Democrats didn't want them to join. But that tells you something, right? That ultimately, their agenda is sort of quite neoliberal and liberal in many respects. They are suspicious of the state. Yes, they want to get back some state control, but just in a way to recreate an efficient market situation. They attack corruption, and as we know from many geographic contexts, the rhetoric, anti-corruption rhetoric, is often a phantom anti-state rhetoric, a suspicion of the state being inherently corrupt, as if capitalism was not corrupt, right? And in these turbulent times, somehow this catch-all nature has worked very well for them.
What accounts for their popularity? Just a desire, basically, to get rid of the old establishment, or more than that?
I think it's more than that, in a sense that they have a promise of a new politics, which in certain respects may overlap with the rhetoric of new left figures, post-crash left figures, as Corbyn, Sanders, and others, because they promise basically to change the process. And they have this direct democracy rhetoric using digital platforms, with consultations, referenda. Now, many left intellectuals just write these off as stupid and fake. But I think there's some interesting elements there, in that there is a new desire for participation. After the long wave of apathy of the neoliberal era, people want to go back to politics because they realize they need it, right? And the Five Star has been offering them an efficient way, a new way of going about it. To participate. Which is often very superficial, right? I mean, clicking and deciding, voting. For example, the Electoral Pact, the so-called government, not the Electoral Pact, the government pact, so-called government contract, as they named it, was sent to a vote.
And 90% voted for.
And 95%
of the membership voted for.
Yeah. It's still quite a small number of people. It is 40,000 members out of 150,000 people who participate, right? Oh. They are managing to capture a new desire for participation in ways that are questionable. But then they are also managing to buy into this new rhetoric of transparency, of honesty, which again, they are not things that can be discounted so easily. Because we come from an era in which Italian politics has been very corrupt, has been very opaque, in which we had non-elected government. I mean, though we have a parliamentary system, they were illegitimate governments in the sense that they were not the governments and the programs.
And Renzi was never elected.
Exactly. As well, Monti, Renzi. Therefore, it is obvious the citizens are looking for a different politics. They're looking for a different way to participate. They want to know what is going on. And again, the interesting part of 5 Star, that I think is something also the left needs to learn from, instead of just basically laughing it out, is this attempt to reconstruct the political party. They don't call themselves a political party because they consider parties inherently corrupt. They call themselves a movement, but actually that's what they've been doing. They've been trying to create a new organizational structure that allows people to participate without going to the typical Wednesday night meeting. Yeah? Though they also have assemblies, right? I mean, it's not that they just have online participation. They have huge assemblies in many different cities, and that is what has allowed them to construct a territorial rootedness which few other parties have. Then there are many bad things that accompany the very casual, fluid, digital nature of the party, in that it is very opportunistic, right? Ultimately, they are often prey to people who approach them and show them some slides, right? This is how you could go about whatever, fiscal policy, or this is how you could go about foreign policy. So this is definitely the problematic aspect of the party. Yet, it cannot be denied that it is the party that has captured the wave of dissent of the post-crisis era, which in other countries we have seen manifested in large popular protests in public squares, right? Occupy, Indignados, Aganaktismen in Greece. In a way, the 5 Star has captured and monopolized that space of dissent.
But Paolo, on one level it is interesting, but on another level, it is quite disturbing that the Italian left, traditional Italian far left, or even people on the left of the old PCI, completely wiped out. They have no place in Italian politics any longer. And this is not the case, for instance, with the Occupy movements. Podemos has a strong anti-capitalist wing in it. For instance, the Sandinistas were left Keynesians, wanting more help from the state, wanting a better foreign policy. The Corbynistas, of course, speak for themselves. The first anti-imperialist leader the Labour Party has ever elected in its entire history, and so on and so on. And Mélenchon, the Mélenchon phenomenon in France, who got a very large vote, very left-wing. So Italy is different from that, is it not?
I think, the Italian left has been devastated in these elections.
From the center-left to the far left.
Yeah, really ranging, like if we take it, from the center-left, from the Democratic Party to the two real left parties, right? At least that's the way in which they were marketing. Liberi e uguali, free and equals, and potere al popolo, power to the people, which was more to the radical end of the spectrum. The Democratic Party had 18% of the polls.
18?
18%, the lowest result in its history. Liberi Uguali, there was a sort of breakaway faction of the Democratic Party, plus some dissidents from other parties, a very kind of hasty attempt to reconstruct the left just before the elections. Just had 3%, they barely managed to actually get in parliament. And finally, Potere al Popolo, which is an alliance of social center, activists, Rifondazione Comunista, and other communist parties, just scored 1%. Right? So it is definitely the lowest result by far, because if we even take the largest definition of the left, namely including the Democratic Party, it's just 21% of the votes. So why is that? I mean, I think it is down to different reasons. I mean, let's start actually from the Democratic Party, because it is quite a different beast from the real left, because it is not really left. It is a neoliberal force by now, very moderate, very extreme center formation.
Like, you know, the Renzi made no secret of his admiration of Tony Blair, for instance.
Hi, Tony. How are you? I'm good. Good to see you. My pleasure. And also
I think the way to explain Renzi to an international audience is that he is an Italian Tony Blair 20 years after, right? And in some ways, so it's as in a way Tony Blair demonstrated. I mean, it was a sort of mix, right, of neoliberalism plus a little bit of social spending, right? And basically, it failed precisely because of that, because this kind of politics is out of place and out of time after the 2008 crisis. I mean, when you have unemployment officially at 11%, but actually at 20%, with some regions in the south with as 40% unemployment rate. I mean, how can you believe that you sort the situation out with some private investment or some foreign investment? There you really need Keynesian policies, at the very least, to change the situation. You need big state spending to change the situation. And he failed utterly because many of his policies were very unpopular, starting from the Jobs Act, which was a labor casualization law, named in English, demonstrating a kind of provincialism of Italian politics. They name unpopular policies in English to make them look better, to many cuts to social spending and many other policies that were ultimately neoliberal and were not what the Italian population wanted ultimately. That is why it failed. Then if we move to the radical left, they fail because of two reasons. First, because in Italy we don't have a Corbyn or Sanders option, because there's nobody from the sort of previous generation of politics that has remained without spotless, without seeing, right? The entire left was involved at some point in coalition governments with the center left. And it was the center left of Romano Prodi, of D'Alema, that was the most neoliberal force in Italy, right? Couched as modernization, right? As Tony Blair did in Britain. They were the people who privatized most public industries. They were the people who introduced labor casualization laws, the Pacchetto Treo in 1997. That is why people hate them. I mean, the people are not stupid. I mean, they have memory as much as elephants have. I mean, they remember things that have been done to them, and they know the people who did those things. So that's the first reason why also the radical left has been stained and is not a viable force. The other reason is that left politics in Italy, as in many other countries, has turned into an identitarian and nostalgic business, right? Where people think that it is enough to fly the red flag and the hammering sickle, that is sufficient to win votes and win working class consensus, which is not the case.
Let's move now to the Lega. This was a party which was set up decades ago by Signor Bossi, completely on the basis of Northern Italian chauvinism. Saying the North has historically been separate from the South. Italy's problems began when there was big migration from the South to the North. So at least he's consistent. He's opposed to migration.
Yeah.
Anywhere, and he made a sort of witty remark as well that blaming Garibaldi by saying that Garibaldi didn't unite Italy, he divided Africa.
Yeah.
So the mood was clear, but there has been a slight shift from that. The politics are more or less the same on immigration, racism, etc. They don't care. They like Trump and people like that. But where they have changed is that the Lega now wants to be an all-Italian party. So what do they say? A, why did this happen? And B, what do they say when they go to the South?
Yes, I mean, I think the Lega Nord is an incredibly interesting case study to understand contemporary politics in the post-crisis era, and much is told by the very renaming of the party. I mean, the party now is not called Lega Nord, it is called Lega. It's not Northern League, it's League, right? So what happened there is that under the leadership of Salvini, who substituted Umberto Bossi after a corruption scandal in 2013, they decided to become the Italian Front National. They understood that there was a demand for the kind of policies also in the South. And significantly, Salvini started touring and doing rallies in the South, sometimes meeting very fierce opposition from social movements, as happened in Naples. It's just a miracle that despite that anti-South, I mean, really racist rhetoric that was used back in the days, he just managed to put it on the side and to capture consensus in the South. The party's policies are similar to Bossi's time in many respects when it comes to anti-migration, when it comes to a very kind of populist rhetoric. They also had already a kind of anti-elite, anti-caste kind of rhetoric back then, but then it is increasingly encroaching on a typical left terrain, appealing to workers, hardworking people, and managing to build a lot of consensus in its criticism of the Euro and the European Union, a criticism that the left has completely abandoned. And therefore, in that regard, it has left free space to the right to occupy that terrain.
And how would you describe, what is Salvini's, of the two leaders at the moment in Italy, I don't like to say this, but Salvini appears to be the one who is a better politician with his own politics, capable of addressing mass crowds, mass meetings, much, much better than the five-star.
Yes, I mean, first and foremost, he is more experienced. Luigi Di Maio, the leader of Five Star, is 31-year-old. He doesn't have as much experience as Salvini, who is 45 and who began his political career when he was 18-year-old. His trajectory is very interesting because he started off as basically a leftist activist within the Lega Nord, which back in the days wanted to create a separatist parliament in Mantua, and therefore it ran separatist elections for the north of Italy. Salvini, in that occasion, was the leader of the Communist of Padania fraction of the Lega Nord. I mean,
the Communists of Padania within the Lega Nord?
Yeah, within the Lega Nord. He considered himself a leftist, though he was a militant in the Lega Nord. He was hanging in typical leftist places, such as Leoncavallo Social Center in Milan. He was in favor of the liberalization of weed, which he evidently enjoyed himself personally. So I think that left aspect in his biography.
So he's socially left liberal.
Yeah, he's a sort of social conservative, or he's a social populist in that he's able to speak to workers. Is able to relate with workers' problems. He has a sort of social angle, right? Which he combines with a very poisonous racist rhetoric. I mean, I would go as far as saying that probably Lega Nord is the most racist party in Europe, perhaps alongside Jobbik. And also, I mean, their anti-migration discourse has been very, very vicious, saying that migrants carry malaria to Italian coasts, saying that it is easier to get rid of rats than of gypsies and black people.
This is all true, and of course very disturbing. So the defeat of the extreme center in Italy has come at the hands of one party of the extreme right and another party which doesn't quite know where it's going or what its politics are, but it wants to be in power, having defeated its enemies.
Yes.
On immigration, This is a huge question, as you know, Paolo, all over Europe.
Yeah.
There have been deportations of the travelers, gypsies, traveling people from France. Manuel Valls was the Prime Minister carrying them out. There have been, not on that level, but there have been some deportations here. Trump is threatening mass deportations of so-called illegal immigrants. Obama actually expelled more migrants than any other US president. So the rhetoric of the Lega is horrible, of course, because they say it very straightforwardly, this is our country, we don't want these people here, etc., etc., forgetting how many Italians became migrants when they left for the United States or South America, which is a very traditional right-wing and even fascist operation. But it's not restricted to Italy. And so those who attack the Lega, quite rightly, very rarely attack the center parties in Europe which are doing the same thing. So this is actually a very European problem which has got a particularly ugly face in Italy.
Yes, definitely. I mean, on the one hand, we can say that it is the typical scapegoating mechanism that is at a time of crisis. There is this tendency for right-wing forces to target hate and anger, which is in society for very good reasons, because people are angered by the economic situation, and to channel that against migrants. Then there is also an issue having to do, in a way, with the way in which the naivety with which the left has managed the question of migration. That is presenting it as something that is just bringing good things to the country and that is enriching the country. While obviously, as all policies, it involves also problems. It involves some people who are not going to be happy because they feel that public services are being stretched. So this is something that has been used by the Lega Nord, also by the Cinque Stelle, that in its opportunism, they did realize that there was an area where they could make inroads into typical right-wing electorate. And they used that very opportunistically. I mean, actually, if you look now at opinion polls, you will see that anti-migration sentiment is above 70%. I mean, then obviously, I think that the left response to that should be first and foremost that we need to provide jobs to people, to everybody, be they migrants or Italians. Otherwise, it's obvious that the social emergency that is brewing in the country at some point will find some fake targets to unleash itself on.
And foreign policy?
In terms of foreign policy, that is quite curious. Again, the ideological landscape is quite curious there because Salvini has a sympathy for Russia and for Putin, right? So he's in a way willing to break from the sort of Atlantic, not from NATO in the short term, right? They are not as, but say to be more open towards Russia, also because Italy has historically a very strong trading relation with Russia and has suffered because of sanctions. And
so they're opposed to sanctions?
Yeah, they're opposed to sanctions. And similarly, the Five Star has also increasingly shifted from being sort of anti-Putin to being more friendly towards Putin. So also from a foreign policy perspective, it's quite interesting the sort of realignment that is happening there. You have Salvini, who is, is making overtures to Russia, also paradoxically to North Korea in certain respects. So that is quite an unfamiliar situation, right, where some typical assumptions about what is left, what is right, what would a left formation do, and what would a right formation do, they are not there anymore. I mean, in a way, there's been a reversal, right, where the right, starting from Salvini, is appealing to workers, promising jobs, promising economic expansion, promising Keynesian measures, deficit spending, while the center-left is promising a typical right platform, is promising financial stability, financial consolidation, is saying that we cannot afford to have so much debt and so much deficit. That is really astonishing. I mean, there's something wrong that has happened there. Italy, if we want to kind of put it in a kind of slogan form, is what happens to the left when the left betrays the people.
Okay, Paolo, thank you very much.